Accounts payable fraud is a big problem for businesses, but it can be particularly bad for e-commerce businesses where you're sending these huge inventory payments overseas. We've got horror stories to tell, but we also have solutions to how to prevent those frauds from happening. Welcome to the E-commerce Finance Podcast. I'm Stephen Brown with Ledger Gurus. With me, I have Rachel Wright. She is one of our accounts payable experts and accounting experts, and we want to talk about some of the things that we've experienced and how to prevent them. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here and talk about fraud.
Let's talk about some horror stories. So the worst that I've experienced, this wasn't actually an e-commerce business. Years ago, we supported this company, and there was this thing called business email compromise. So you'll get a phishing email, you'll click on a link, it asks you to put in your credentials, and you're basically giving your login to your email, and then the hackers get in and they're able to snoop around. The hacker got in, they were doing some large construction projects. They got in and started spoofing the vendor to this company. They started talking to us as if they were the vendor. They started talking to us as if they were the CEO of this company. And they created this elaborate fraud where they injected false invoices into the system and asked us to change bank information. And we're able to get a decent amount of money out of the customer because the customer went along with the ruse. This is one example of accounts payable fraud, but it demonstrates how these fraudsters, how these hackers will go about trying to extract money out of you. And paying bills is one of the best ways for people to get money out. Rachel, what are some of the examples you've seen over the years where people are trying to get money out of a business?
Yeah, so one example that I've seen is, and I think that fraudsters often try to mimic something, so something that you might be familiar with, and try to change it a little bit. Like, for example, we got one invoice that it was for $60,000, so it was a lot of money, and all the company information on it was correct. I researched it myself. The company address, EIN, everything was correct. A real company. The only difference is that they changed the pay to name and the email, and they had it going to like a CPA name, which didn't make a lot of sense, but it's kind of a subtle thing that if you're not really paying attention, you might just go ahead and process the invoice, and then this fraudster would be getting this $60,000 payment. And I think it's important to really pay attention if there's something is that high, like a $60,000 bill is not going to be often. So it's something you really want to keep an eye out on and just verify that everything's correct before you process it. Fortunately, our team caught it. It looked off, and we found out it was fraudulent, so we didn't process it.
Yeah, and a couple things there, like accountants usually aren't going to receive payments for their customers, right? Exactly. Usually when you're working with an outsourced accountant, we're going to have you pay to the customer, not to us. Like, why would we want to take somebody's money so that we can then pass? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's not.
So that's an interesting red flag. Yeah. I've got another story. This is, and you've probably seen some of these. I met with a customer a couple years ago, and it was their CFO or their controller, and he had one of their Chinese suppliers email him and said, "Hey, we need to change our bank information." It was right before Chinese New Year, when a lot of these manufacturers go offline. We need to get this payment in before Chinese New Year. Can you please process it? By the way, this is the new bank information. So he went ahead and sent the payment to this new bank information. Turns out it was fraudulent. Now, I don't know how they got in. Again, I described earlier how a lot of these fraudsters get in. They'll compromise your email, or maybe they even compromise the email of one of your vendors. And so they know how to communicate in a way that you might respond. And they'll put on this urgency around changing bank information. And the challenge with an e-commerce business is their biggest payments tend to be overseas payments for inventory. They're huge numbers. So like 60,000, you can get orders that are hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, depending on the size of the business. And it's often going overseas. So you have even less controls and protections than say if there was a fraudulent payment that was done in the United States. So
Right.
this is there's a couple patterns there, like changing bank information. You've seen this too. Do you have some examples where people were trying to get them to change bank information quickly?
We've definitely seen, yeah, we've definitely seen invoices or emails with invoices where they maybe included bank information that wasn't previously provided, and again, they have this urgency where they try to make us think that this should have been paid like a month ago, and so I think especially clients tend to get really concerned about those things and and just want to push them through, and that's really where you got to take a step back and evaluate, is this inconsistent with what we've seen before, and just go through the proper channels to verify, try to verify if this is something that is that is legitimate.
And oftentimes what these criminals will do is they'll prey on human psychology. So they'll say things like, if you don't pay me tomorrow, we're going to cut off services, or we're going to hold this order, or they'll find ways to give you a sense of panic, which usually, if you learn about psychology a little bit, it pulls us out of our rational brain into more of a primitive brain where we don't always think through things. We're like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. I need to do something to make this trouble go away. I had a phone call years ago. It was really early in the morning, but it wasn't too early. It was like 6 a.m. And they said they're from the IRS and we had problems with the payment. So they caught me out of my sleep and they're like, that saying, you had a return issue. You need to get this payment processed right away. Da, 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 da. Well, I worked for the tax accountant, so I didn't respond, but I was like, hey, I got this, they triggered a panic in me, and I talked to my tax accountant, and they're like, oh, everything's good. And then as I thought through it, I was like, that was a fraudster. They were trying to get me to do something in that moment. And because I had a tax accountant, I said, hey, let me talk to my tax accountant. I'll get back to you. When in reality, like the IRS isn't going to call you at 6 in the morning, even though they're 2 hours ahead of me. That, first of all, I don't think they do those kind of things. They usually send you official letters, and so fraudsters will try to put you in a state of panic so that you do things irrational. They'll create a sense of urgency. They'll create a sense of there's going to be a problem if you don't do this thing.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me of, like, I think everyone's probably gotten those texts from USPS saying like, we can't
Mm-hmm.
deliver your package. You have to
Yep.
go to this link and pay us $20 first.
Yep.
And I've seen people get all stressed out about it, and I'm just like, that's not how they operate. So you have to ask yourself, is this how how things are normally operate? And usually it's going to be no.
And for these hackers, it's a number game. They only need to get one person to bite on the fraud for them to have some
Hmm.
success or a certain percentage. But
Yeah.
businesses are juicy targets because we can send around big payments, and an e-commerce business can send around huge payments around inventory. So we wanted to have this conversation because it's an issue we've seen for years and it keeps coming up. Do you have any other examples of scenarios where fraudsters have tried to do something?
Yeah, speaking of, making like the point of like going outside of the norm. I got an email from a fraudster, but it was like an email that was urgent, right? And they made it look like someone from our internal team told him to send me this email so that we could process it. And that's just not that's just not our process. Like, we don't handle business that way. And so, um, again,
Yeah,
this is another
they'll fake
example
like
of,
a thread. They'll create an email that looks like it
yeah,
was a series of emails back and forth, and then you got forwarded
yeah.
the latest version. You weren't on the email chain until the end. A lot of this fraud's going on
Hmm.
via email,
And then when you
sometimes
look at
via
the,
text.
yeah, and then when you really take time to look at the details, you start noticing inconsistencies. Like, the email it was sent from changed halfway through the email to a completely different email address in the chain. So it's like there's these little hints that they fraudsters can't always avoid, that you just have to be willing to take the time to carefully review those things.
So let's talk about some of the ways we can protect against fraud, where these are things that we do as we support our customers. And we'll work from kind of the basics to the more where we see a lot of fraud being targeted. Let's talk about this concept of separation of duties. What does that mean?
Yeah, so in our AP work, so we don't want to have the same person creating vendors and then entering the bill and approving it, right? Because then you open that up to fraud. And if you don't have a second set of eyes on things, then one person might miss something that the other person will pick up on. So best practice is if you have someone processing the bills, as in like they take the first pass, they enter the bill, enter all the information, make sure we have everything in the system, and then the second person approves it. And then in the cases where we need to enter a new vendor or update vendor information, we have another person who does that, and they'll review all the information, make sure everything looks legitimate, create the vendor or update the information, and then it goes to the person who will enter the bill. And then we have an approver as the last defense before the bill goes to get paid. So that's just how we try to separate things to avoid fraud and avoid missing those red signs.
And a lot of small business owners will be like, I don't need that. I just do it all myself, which is great until it's not. You work with me on Ledger Guru's finance. I'm usually the final person to touch a bill and finally pay it. So I'm the one who pays. You guys do all the prep work. But there's times when we'll go back and forth and have our conversations. And the reason we've gotten to this place is we're bigger. And as e-commerce businesses get bigger, you get more people working on more projects where, like there'll be a point where like the owner can't have all the relationships with vendors. And so you need, in my opinion, it's good to have accounting prepare and kind of manage the process. It's good to have the people have the vendor relationships to be the ones signing off to be like, yeah, that was legit. And then it's good to have like kind of a final say, or either it's the CEO, COO, maybe there's a CFO, but somebody who's really going to be like careful with and making sure like, hey, did everything get checked off? Was the process followed? Yeah. On that note, there's this concept of multiple approvals, right? You talked a little bit about approval. As you get bigger, you can't keep on top of everything. Like your team's doing multiple projects, you're not involved with anything, or you shouldn't be. But it's important to have different people signing off on, yeah, this was an appropriate bill.
Yeah.
What are other things where it makes sense to go ahead?
Yeah, I've seen those differences with some of our AP clients. Some of them just don't want to have anything to do with the process. They just want us to process it and then they pay it. Whereas, and then some of them will have like one person from the appropriate department will approve that bill, and so they have several people in there approving different bills. And that really gives me peace of mind that because we don't know all the doings of our clients. And so we could pass through a bill that maybe they shouldn't actually be paying, but we have no idea because we're not involved in that. And so when they're involved, it really helps us with our process.
Yeah, and I can understand why people want to get out of it. The reality is, for me, paying bills is going in, scanning, and clicking pay. And I see a lot of people when we set up these processes, they'll still it's like, no, just you want to make sure, did everybody sign off on this, right? Did so-and-so who appears to be the one who's working with this vendor approve it? Or did it go through like an accounting review? Yeah. That takes seconds, right? It's not like where you have to go in and set everything up, but it's still good for people who, if you care about your money and your assets, this is a good place to care.
Yeah, for sure.
The final area is around vendor management. A lot of the examples we talked about was around vendor management. And when we talk about vendor management, what are we talking about, Rachel?
Yeah, so when we talk about vendor management, we talk about the person or people who make sure our vendors' information is updated or who add new vendors. And we have special permissions for those people, so not everybody can go in and change those things. So, and we have processes where we verify information to make sure that we're getting everything correct.
If you look at big businesses, Oftentimes they'll have really slow accounts payable processes, and this is part of the way. It doesn't mean they don't have issues. I saw an article years ago that some guy in Europe just started sending invoices to Microsoft and they paid them like it was like millions of dollars. Maybe it was, I think it was Microsoft, might have been another big tech company. All he was doing is sending fraudulent invoices with payment information. Ideally, you want to go through a process of, when you get a new vendor, that you're making sure, hey, is this the person I've been talking to?
Hmm.
We like to do a technique for larger payments of verbal validation or research validation. We research, hey, does the address on the invoice, does it match public records? Does the contact
Yeah.
information, if I call somebody up at that, not the number on the invoice, but I'll go to the website, can I talk to somebody in accounts payable?
Yeah.
And just say, I need to do a verbal validation. A lot of companies, when you say that, they'll know what you're talking about. And they'll say, okay, yeah, let me read back to you. And if that bank account doesn't match what's on the invoice, something's wrong.
Yeah. And I think these processes that we've done have been very, very effective in catching fraud and avoiding it. We've really caught a lot of things and avoided a lot of fraudulent payments.
So let's talk about some of the things that you should put extra attention to. What type of changes should you do thoughtfully?
Yeah. So, and you want to know how your vendors are being paid. So if you're sending your vendor a check and you get a message that you need to update their address to a different address, you want to verify that and be careful there to make sure that you're sending it to their address. And that's something where you can reach out to the vendor with either contact information you had previously where you were communicating, or go to their website. Another one, a big one, is bank information.
Let me stop you there real quick. So
Yeah.
what fraudsters could do is they could set up a business with the same name in a different place. They'll get a bank account and then they'll just redirect a check. It's not that hard to set up a business and get a business bank account.
Yeah.
So they'll redirect a check to a different address. They'll deposit it because the name is basically matches what's on the check. Once that money clears, they'll take the funds out, move it to a different bank account, and move on. So
Hmm.
that one we
Yeah.
don't see as much because people are moving increasingly away from checks. Let's go to the
Yeah.
next one where we see a ton of.
Yeah, a big one is bank information. And like we get a lot of invoices that have just a bank account information right on the invoice. And a lot of our clients will really want us to just, put in the bank information and let's pay it. And that's really something where you have to be really careful, because, we've seen these examples where we get all this bank information that is not coming from the vendor. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, and there's really 2 points of risk here. There's the first time you're getting a vendor set up, and then
mhm.
I would say in particular when somebody asks you to change banks. Here's the thing. Do businesses change banks? Sure. It's kind of a pain. It doesn't happen that often. And so
Yeah.
if somebody's asking you to pay a different bank account, somebody you've worked with for years, that should be a bit of I won't say a red flag, but a bright orange flag. Like,
Hmm.
this is not something that happens every day. Slow down, check, because that's the other thing is you think it's easy to extract funds when you get a check. Well, when those funds drop into a fraudulent bank account, the minute those have cleared, they'll pull that out and it's gone. And when you're
Yeah.
dealing with international wire payments, it's even worse. You have no recourse, pretty much. Even in the U.S., what I've seen with bank fraud, I've been around a couple situations and talked to some people who have dealt with this stuff. They said you can bring the FBI in. There's a good chance you're not going to get your money back. And worse yet, you might have your business in the news for the wrong reason. So they were like, it's got to be pretty egregious for you to want to reach out to the FBI, even though you've been criminally abused. And you go back to the banks and they'll be like, there's nothing I can do about it. Right. So these are techniques that they will use, and they will find ways to kind of work through the gray areas of the system in a way that they can extract money.
Yeah. And
What
I
else
think
should
a
you
big
be cautious about?
Yeah, I think a big thing with communication, especially email communication, is that you really need to pay attention to email addresses. We've seen a lot of attempts to impersonate an email address with maybe a small change, make it look the same. As that's something we've seen a lot. Or maybe they'll have like the name of your client or someone you're familiar with as the name of the email, but then the email address itself will be different. So you really want to pay attention.
A good example, I'd say, is a .co versus a .com.
Yeah.
I would argue if you don't own your .co for your domain name, you really should, because that's hackers are going to want to go buy the .co, because then they'll send it from, like ledgergurus.co versus ledgergurus.com, and you may not catch that.
That's true. Yeah.
Another technique I saw in a complex fraud years ago, they took a vendor had an M in the name, and they registered a domain name that had the same spelling, except instead of an M, they put an RN. When you look at an RN really quickly, it looks like an M. And it got missed. So they do all sorts of like devious things around technology. They may break, it's a lot easier if you break into email, but a lot of stuff that you've seen is them just sending stuff into the ether, right? They'll just send it out, or, doesn't even have to be your email that gets broken. If one of your supplier's emails gets compromised, then they can start working it from that angle.
Yeah. And something I've actually done before is if like an email address will have like maybe a lowercase or an uppercase I or lowercase L, where you could switch those out. I've taken the copy of the email and made it uppercase to make sure that it is the correct spelling. When I've been kind of suspicious of something, I've actually done that to make sure it's the right email address.
So bad spelling is one of the things we see a lot. A lot of these hackers are foreign. There's a lot of industrialized criminal hacking coming out of parts of Eastern Europe, parts of Asia. And they're not always the best spellers. What's scary, though, I want to kind of wrap up on where I think it's going to get even worse. For those of us that have been around this, bad spelling is one of the tells that we see. But in the age of AI, that might... Uncommon phrases,
Yeah, like, please kindly pay this. It's not something that people normally say. We're doing business.
What I worry about is like spelling and good grammar. Well, AI may be able to spoof that better than a non-English speaker would it be able to. That said, AI loves M dashes. To me, when I see the M dash now, I almost always go, okay, that was written by AI. But the grammar areas, the grammar errors of these fraudsters may go away with AI.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
The other thing I worry about is when you talk about verbal validation, AI can now spoof voices. You can do AI videos. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but you might get on a video call with somebody and it feel like you're talking to somebody. It might be like a hacker impersonating. And one of the things I've heard about, how do you come around that? We may need to start using like safe words, that are only communicated when you are sure that the person is on the other end. So when you have to go through some sort of validation sequence, there is a safe word that's used to validate. I don't know that we're there yet, but some of the stuff I'm reading and hear about is that might be the next frontier for hackers, is not only spoofing us in emails, but spoofing us in video, on video calls or phone calls. Like one of the things, have you heard, Rachel, about the calls where it will sound like they'll call old people. They'll be like, Grandma, Grandpa, I got into trouble in Mexico. I need you to, can you send a wire to get me out of jail? Have you heard about that fraud?
Yeah, I have. My grandpa I don't know if it was a call or something about my brother being in trouble and just sending money.
Yeah, they'll be like, I'm in trouble and I need you to wire this money to get me out of jail. And they will, it's really easy to spoof somebody's voice now with a lot of these AI tools. And then they'll go after vulnerable people, and then they'll use like urgent situations, like I'm trying to save a loved one. Well, these techniques, I'm sure they already are and will probably become more commonly used with businesses trying to defraud them.
Yeah.
So I think slowing down, double checking, triple checking, some of the same techniques we talked about, you could apply in the AI era, and just making sure that you're, when you set somebody up to get paid, that you're sure that that's who they say they are. And then if anything changes, that you're darn sure, probably even double, triple sure that those changes are legit. If you apply some of those same considerations, especially to larger payments, it might not be reasonable to do that for every payment that you have. But when you're dealing with stuff that's really large compared to what you have in your bank account, it's worth slowing down, pausing, and making sure it's you're doing it right.
Yeah, for sure.
Any final thoughts, Rachel?
Yeah, I just really encourage people to take, even just 30 seconds to review something, because chances are if something's off, you'll notice it in those 30 seconds. And it's just better safe than sorry. I always try to push this. This is a big thing for me. I've seen a lot of stuff. And I think in the end it will save you money.
Slow down. Your money, your dollars are hard to earn. Don't give them to bad guys. Thanks for joining me today and having this conversation, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ledger Gurus, your go-to team for e-commerce accounting. We handle everything from keeping your books in order and tackling sales tax to managing your inventory accounting and even acting as your fractional CFO. Basically, if it's about accounting, we've got it covered so you can focus on growing your business. Head over to ledgergurus.com and see how our team can help you level up your business today. That's LEDGERGURUS.com.